I have this daunting task of introducing him, and I'll do it very quickly. I mean, when I introduce someone like Sheth, probably we can talk for the entire day to talk about his accomplishments. But very briefly, Professor Sheth is, I would say, the world's probably most renowned professor of marketing. He is a living legend. He is somebody who has been cited thousands and thousands of times for his research. He has written more than 300 research papers, all in top-tier A journals, and more than 30 books that have been used all throughout the world, including his latest book, which is called The Accidental Scholar, which is actually his autobiography. Before he came to Emory, and he has been at Emory since 1991, Professor Sheth has taught and held endowed chair professorships at the University of Southern California, and before that he was at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He has also been a professor at Columbia University and MIT. He has been a consultant to numerous Fortune 500 companies, has presented more than 1,000 presentations in at least 20 countries, shaped a whole generation of marketing scholars around the world. I mean, his doctoral students and their doctoral students have shaped the profession beyond anything that we can think about. And it's really, really, really an honor for us to have him out here. He's, as you know, busy with his AMA activities. There is the AMA Sheth Foundation Award that goes to the best professor in marketing annually, and the conference has just started today at the Atlanta Marriott Marquis, so he will have to go there right from here. But again, it is such an honor to have you, and thank you for making the time to be here. Professor Sheth.
Thank you. Thank you, Avi.
Thank you so much.
Do I have a remote? Okay. Well, good morning. I know they will fix the sound, but it's okay. My style is totally conversational. Raise questions as we go along. However, for videotaping purposes, they've asked me to make presentations first, and then we have a Q&A. And for Q&A also, in fact, they want to make sure that you have a microphone so it can be recorded for other people to watch, et cetera, et cetera. So I came to the States in 1961 as a foreign graduate student. And at that time, there were not too many people from India, and they don't know how to pronounce our names at that time. So I was given a nickname, not at University of Pittsburgh, where I started my journey, but 1963, I joined the faculty of Columbia University in New York, and that is where, in fact, my colleagues simply said, we don't know how to pronounce your name, Jagdish, et cetera. We'll call you Jag, like in Jaguar. And ever since that association, I've been dreaming of owning a Jaguar with a license plate Jag, right? In the great state of Georgia, the license plate is available. California, you couldn't get that plate. California, 25% of the plates are all vanity plates, as they call it, right? So my dream became a reality of having a Jaguar 17 years ago when I turned 60. I'm 77 now. Do I look 77? That's because in marketing, first thing we learn, it's all about packaging anyhow, right? And as the ingredients are aging, you have to have better packaging, right? Pretty much so. But true story, I have 2 grown-up children. Both live in Atlanta, both married. And they surprised me on my birthday. I don't count my birthdays. I come from a generation where birthdays were not at all counted or important or appreciated. And so I just went out to get the local paper, AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I remember it was Saturday morning around Labor Day weekend, usually where my birthday falls. And I turned around and saw this beautiful Jaguar, top of the line, XJ model. Even the color I like, actually, they have figured out the color. Parked in the driveway with a handwritten license plate, Jag, happy 60th birthday. It was a rental car, unfortunately. So I'm still looking for my Jaguar, okay? And the irony of the whole thing is that Jaguar, which is the state, the whole British Empire official car, is owned now by Tata Motors, which is an Indian enterprise. Think about that one, which was an ex-colony of this country. This is the change. And if there are two industries that are likely to go through massive change and will have a hard time coping with the change, and I'll tell you why, are both education and health. And the reason why these two industries will have a tougher time transitioning from where they are to where they need to go, primarily because they are governed by two distinct mechanisms. On the one hand, you have the accreditation mechanism, which I understand you just got reaccredited, which is a great news. And so accreditation bodies have their own ways of shaping what the business schools ought to do. And the other one, of course, is being a state university especially. You have lots of regulation that comes in. And I can even add a third one sometimes based upon my own experiences as an administrator, as well as committee leader, policy change, etc. Internal governance mechanisms also change. So sometimes you don't know at the higher level at the university what the administration is thinking about. They are buffeted by different things. You bring in a new president or a new provost in the process, and you have seen all the cascading down impacting the deans, the faculty, everybody. So you have this internal change that's taking place, as we see in the state of Georgia, where there is a consolidation of campuses. So Georgia Southern, I think, is the one that has been merged now with Kennesaw State. And you have seen the same thing with Georgia State, I think, right? Is the one that is Georgia Perimeter, and they're going to blend, which is a massive change. So you have three changes, but the two are very critical, namely the state governance mechanisms, which vary state by state, and the accreditation mechanisms, which makes the change not that easy. That's the main point. So I think we have to be all on the same page to say, what is the future? Future usually is quite brighter than we think, and how do we adjust to the change as quickly as we can within the constraints? The third sector that I have analyzed, I worked quite a lot for regulated industries like the telephone companies. I worked quite a lot for electric utilities, banking. They're all highly regulated on the one hand, and therefore bringing about a change is a much slower process. So here are the four factors that are driving our industry. There's a book, by the way, called Business School in the 21st Century, written by three of us. So here are the four key drivers. The book is called Business School in the 21st Century, Cambridge University Press, probably 4 years out now. It took us 3 to 4 years to write the book itself, and three of us are very different people. Howard Thomas, who is our lead author, is actually the dean, or was the dean at Singapore Management University. Warwick, before that one in England, he's a British gentleman, Welsh actually. And then, of course, he was at University of Illinois as the dean, so he has a complete experience of 3 different continents or geographies. And of course, he's recognized in strategy and management as a top thinker. He was SESB president, or whatever title you get, as an elected body. Also EQUIS, which is, I think, the European accreditation body. He's one of the very few, so he's a co-author. And the other co-author is Peter Lorange. Peter Lorange is a Norwegian originally, came to Harvard to do his DBA, and then decided to join INSEAD for a while in France, but then he started IMD in Switzerland, as you know, which is ranked among the top business schools. And IMD is the one where they have no tenure at all, totally opposite. They don't teach students, they only teach managers. But it made it among the top 10 recognized universities or institutes, which is unusual again. So that's what they have done. And so 3 of us agreed to write, because 3 of us all have different views about what the next model should be for a business school, primarily, to survive and to grow in the process. So I just wanted to mention that it's a book has had strong influence on ASCSB accreditation. That's the key point. And accreditation bodies are using the thought leaders. Several books have been written by several scholars from Harvard, Stanford, etc. And they're trying to see where they should be moving through accreditation process, moving the business schools in a direction which obviously would be the direction for growth and survival, which I think I just wanted you to mention. Our last comment I will make before I start formal presentation has to do with another thing. I have actually a video, Avi. If you have an interest, I'll be happy to send. I formally produced a video. Again, the voice is fading in and out. I'm so sorry. But I actually, in fact, have a video which says, what are the breakout growth strategies for the MBA program in the US? MBA program is probably the most successful program since World War II for any graduate education or graduate degree in any discipline. Had a spectacular growth. It was designed primarily for engineers, immediately to give them the business vocabulary, because in engineering colleges, 4 years, sometimes 5 years, had no courses on economics, accounting. So engineers who graduate go to the corporations without knowing supply and demand, macroeconomics, microeconomics, ABC of finance, accounting language, double entry, ledger. They just don't know the language even. And the argument was that the industry was complaining that we have to train them all those. Is it possible if it becomes a national agenda, most of the MBA students eventually, I'm sorry, this is fading in and out. Most of the people actually, in fact, were, engineers being employed, which was the fastest growing at that time. So we created a 2-year MBA curriculum. The first-year curriculum of MBA generally, I find fascinating, is often not even as good as very strong undergraduate business programs. Isn't that interesting? First-year core is primarily, in fact, just to give them the vocabulary, which would be less than undergraduates in like economics discipline, for economics, for example. Undergraduates were always strong programs before that one, especially in accounting, because it became a certification. To do a CPA review, you had to take accounting classes, CPA review classes, and you became an accountant after writing the CPA exams, which is basically vocational, as we call it, which was the old model of the business schools. The book has an excellent history by Howard Thomas about the evolution of the business schools from late 1800s, essentially, in Germany, in England, as well as in America. So it's a very interesting evolution. So MBA is a post-World War II degree, essentially. We survived quite a lot by having that pent-up demand. 2 years. Second year, we don't allow electives. Remember that? MBA is a general management degree, so you have to take marketing, finance, etc., in some depth, but no concentration, really speaking. That was the idea. Interesting. We survived that MBA growth from fresh graduates to expanding into evening MBA, working managers, which is a much bigger pool than new fresh graduates. And some universities survived by just offering evening MBA programs for working professionals, which is similar to University of Phoenix model without accreditation. It became the largest competitor, actually, to business schools, surprisingly, by having multiple campuses, remember? All rented into small places, but that's where managers worked or lived. Of course, they went online much earlier than universities did, and they probably had 250,000 students, which no university would have ever imagined is possible. We used to admire Ohio State University with a campus of about 60,000 students or somewhere in that name. Arizona State now is larger than that. University of Central Florida will become the largest, is the forecast, as a single campus, all this stuff. Nobody imagined reaching the size of 250,000 students. So the scale came on the non-accredited and outside non-traditional competitor. Interesting. Then we invented executive MBA. Remember weekend MBAs? And that became popular. At a time when corporations were wanting to retain leaders, from functional heads who want to become general managers, of a business unit or a corporation, you had a career path. I taught Sloan Fellows, for example, at MIT, where you came out 9 months away from the job full-time, or 10 months and got your, basically, an MS degree. I think Sloan School still does not offer MBA. They have been able to offer only MS degree, and they're very successful at MIT. That is now coming to also a halt. Corporations are not investing in their executives as career path for MBA degree. At Emory University, our executive MBA students who come, 60 to 65% are actually there for a career change in their life. We never thought of outplacement. Remember career management services for executives. We know true about the students. So this is another change that's happening. But now that MBA program is coming to a plateau. The GMAC, which is the people who administer GMAT, for example, the council, that graduate, management admission or whatever council they call it, is having less and less applicants. And the number of applicants are all more and more from other countries rather than here. So the traditional MBA is under a lot of pressure. And therefore, what are the ways we can survive and grow, which are all kinds of new experiments taking place. So I will talk about the context first, and then talk about the kinds of possibilities which are all available. It's a question of motivating and managing internal administrative approval process. Maybe the state, if state legislature is involved or the administrative bodies are involved, and maybe accreditation essentially. So how do we manage regulation ourselves rather than regulation managing us becomes very key. So let me try to see if I can do the forward and backward on this stuff. Let me see. Yeah, I'm doing okay. That's great. Whenever you do this thing, do you get a delight, It works. I feel always, my God, it's a very interesting feeling you get, right? So here are the 4 drivers. There may be more. The first driver, surprisingly for us in the business degree program, is demographic diversity. We are getting students of all ages, ethnic backgrounds, of course, gender distribution. We'll talk about that and how that's going to impact what we do, primarily from a teaching viewpoint and some from a research viewpoint. The second one is advances in digital information technology, which is more massive and disruptive than what we have so far been able to recognize, let alone manage it. The third one is globalizing enterprises. Even if you are local here, you get impacted by the globalization, and therefore, how do you create global mindset, and what are the career paths of managers that you train? A Chick-fil-A here would be a great example for that, for example, as to their global expansion, etc. And the last one, of course, is new competition that I already touched upon. So let's go through in some detail. The first one is we have 4 kinds of diversities. There's an age diversity. The range of ages that come in the classroom is now much different than fresh undergraduate, let's say engineering. And by the way, from engineering, we shifted in the late 70s after the first energy crisis to liberal arts. Smart kids in liberal arts who really didn't want to take business. They really wanted to be English majors or music majors, had no jobs. So business degree became a livelihood degree, not just knowledge and enlightenment, interestingly. So we got great students from that at one time. And then, of course, later on, private universities very strongly decided among the top 10 that we would like to have only experienced MBAs. Remember, no fresh students, but 3 to 5 year work experience. So we were able to shift that slightly, but today I think it's much more bigger shift. So that's clearly age diversity. We have income diversity, the same thing. The whole society has an income diversity. So we have students who can afford quite a lot, or students who have to borrow money on a student loan, etc., etc. The third one is ethnic diversity. The whole country by 2030 will be non-white majority. If you want to see this change, you've got to be in California. California is already non-white majority right now. Second big state in population is Texas. I think by 2016 or 17 will be non-white majority. And a third state out of nowhere, surpassing Pennsylvania and New York as a state, is going to be Florida. And Florida will be also non-white majority by 2030 latest, it looks like, based upon demographic trends. So how do you manage a cultural diversity in the classroom? That becomes an issue in some fashion. And I'll talk about the implications. And the last one is lifestyle diversity. Today you have not a traditional homemaker and a breadwinner. Today you have a dual income, career-oriented families. The next generation does not think that if I get married, especially as a woman, I would be a homemaker. That was my generation. You give up great education, career, because that's what you thought, the division of labor. Today is just the opposite. In metro areas, you can't even survive without a two-income family. Okay? So single breadwinner, which means mainly problem is that when you have both husband and wife working with children, biggest shortage is time. They don't have time. My kids are in their 50s. They have no time. They're so full in terms of activities, etc. So time constraints that we have in education, you have to have classes at certain times. Location constraint, you have to come to the campus. Those now begin to become more of a problem from a student viewpoint, and therefore can we offer a course 12 midnight? And you think that's less laughable. But there are students taking classes at midnight. You might be offering probably, I don't know. But Kennesaw State, I think, has one of those classes. I don't know, it's not in our discipline, I know. Students like to wake up at that time, okay? Rather than wake up in the morning kind of stuff. They're very different. When we try to teach a class in the morning, very few undergraduates ever want to sign up. They really perk up after 12, it looks like, lunchtime essentially. So given that kind of a lifestyle, plus the working women, etc., location and time become more of a constraint. So how do we manage that? So those are the 4 areas. So what are its implications? First of all, we'll get older, experienced students in the classroom, which means they have a work experience. They have a life experience, and they're going to challenge what we say in the classroom. How do we learn to have a dialogue with them? I find it very important that they are not willing to simply say whatever you say is the right one. Problem at my university is that these guys also have laptops or cell phones. While I'm talking about a company, they've already done the Google search and found the latest information, which I'm obsolete. It's interesting, right? So they say, Professor, you don't know. This is what happened a minute ago, right? Which is interesting, which is a technology impact. So it's very key. More experiential learning will become more and more necessary. In fact, we are pushing this agenda at SESB that we need to change the curriculum, and how do you count your contact hours where you are taking them to field trips, essentially. My worry is that our MBA programs, especially MBA undergraduate, I'll talk a little later on, got designed primarily by emulating social sciences. How do we teach in economics, in sociology, political science, etc., as opposed to being designed around engineering schools or medical schools. In engineering schools, you never graduate without building a gadget, contraption. In medical school, you never graduate without cutting the cadaver, whether you like it or not. So half is clinical and half is cognitive. Whereas we are used to teaching mostly cognitive stuff. We may not even have ourselves clinical experiences. If you see the trend of top scholarly young people, they come straight from undergraduate into the PhD, bypassing even MBA. They don't know the vocabulary of business language in classes, but they're top publishing, brain power, and they teach something. They have no work experience whatsoever. That comes to haunt you now. I remember at Illinois, I even put a process where we had not only executive in residence, people who come like 1 week to really get a campus experience back, but I started the faculty in business program by saying these young, bright people need to actually live and breathe into a corporation, like a summer internship, fully paid, rather than being in their office and do the research, for example. So experiential learning is becoming necessity both for the faculty, surprisingly, not in your case, but because here there are more experienced faculty, but in general, research-oriented campuses, that's very key. Affordability will become an issue. Who pays for their education? You see political debates going on that right now. And I think it will become more and more, which is where the state governments will get more impacted, whether we have the Hope Fellowships as Georgia has, for example, through the lottery. How do we fund it? That becomes an issue. Diversity challenges in the classroom. Our language, especially our body language, is conditioned by the past. And the other side of the person sees through right away. Without your speaking a word, they know whether you even respect diversity. Or are you locked into your own stereotype about diversity of people, whether they are diversity of our own ethnic groups in this country or diversity in terms of foreign students coming here. Always the case. Every nation has stereotypes about other ethnic groups. Within a nation, if there's a diversity, so how do you rise above that? In fact, this is a place where we think in the business schools especially, we might have to provide sensitivity training to the faculty. As we are doing about sexual harassment training, have you seen that mandatory now? To get federal grants, every staff and the faculty has to go through some sort of a workshop, online in this case. I went through that pretty much. I passed, fortunately, which is interesting, but that's what I'm trying to say. I think these are the new realities, right? Pretty much so. And continuous education is a major opportunity. I calculated in the book that why should we get 4 years of undergraduate revenues from students? Knowledge in general is depreciating faster and faster. Half-life of knowledge for software is down to 3 years. Is that rapidly changing? Electrical engineering finds itself like 5-year half knowledge. In business, my estimate is that half-life of our knowledge is down to 18 months. So by the time we graduate, half of the knowledge is obsolete. I never studied e-commerce. I never studied supply chain, which you are focusing, it looks like. I never studied quality management. Are you with me? World is moving on. And therefore, how do we create what I call a lifetime value of the customer? So suppose Emory University in the business school has 100,000 graduates. What if we had an upfront agreement that we will be training them for the rest of their life? Not 4 years of undergraduate or 2 years of MBA, and charge for that upfront. It's prepaid revenue. The numbers are staggering. And if the deans have the discretion of some executive education, non-degree programs, you have the discretion of whatever surplus you create, you probably can spend it within your own budget, within the guidelines of the university, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a governance mechanism, but you have the discretion to do what you can do. Most deans don't have discretionary budgets anymore. Not just faculty lines, but anything discretionary, their hands are tied. You have to raise that money outside of the state budgetary mechanism or fee mechanism, essentially, by and large. That's a very interesting area. Now, what was a continuing education? Remember correspondence schools? How many of you remember correspondence schools? We are aging ourselves, right? Remember? You sent the book out, students studied at home, sent the book back, you graded. Correspondence schools then became distance learning. How many of you remember that? Remember? Distance learning. And distance learning today, of course, is the internet in many ways. We can talk about Coursera, MOOCs, etc., which is a part of our competition. But that's very interesting. What was peripheral education now becomes more core, and by definition, what is core may become peripheral, although it will be a slow process. I found one rule of business which I find fascinating. It is as good as Einstein's equation, for example. Anything we do as a daily necessity, when we give it up, it always comes back as a hobby. Hunting, fishing, gardening, baking breads. Right? Cooking is a big hobby now. We don't want to cook daily. That's outsourced industry, right? Everybody wants to, eat out or have food, but we want to be weekend gourmet people, right? Have you seen the Food Channel doing so well on cable? We are making ordinary chefs extraordinary celebrities. Have you seen that thing? So as we outsource house cleaning, we'll come back as a hobby also, right? People say, now that's where I don't agree, It's very interesting how there are boundaries. People say, I don't believe it will ever happen. But so what was continuing education? Universities used to have large university departments. How do you make it core as opposed to just peripheral? Becomes how do you make it integrated? Becomes interesting. Flexible curriculum and shorter degree programs. Private universities, for example, we are finding smart kids want to finish their education in 3 years. They don't want to spend 4 years for either affordability, parents' money, or they would like to do something else, continue graduate education in social sciences, humanities, that's very common, or in fact become entrepreneurs, whatever it is. So they want to get the education out in 3 years, and how do you manage that transition because you drop 1 year of revenue? Private universities are struggling with that one. So I'll just move a little faster because of the time. This is the impact of information technology at a broader level first, and then specific to our area. I've done a lot of work here for the telephone industries in using this framework. The early days was product mobility we created when we had the divorce of production from consumption. Remember, in the agriculture age, you produce the same day and consume the same day in the same locality, like local, produce, etc. But once we get industrial age, production and consumption got separated, divorced. So now we have to ship out things. So we invented or created shipping and railroads, were the first to move products around. Then we invented automobiles for personal mobility. I could move labor around, People can move around, for example, the automobile. And two industries that came out well were the auto and the oil industry. Now it is everything about information mobility. And the three components are the content, which is getting aggregated more and more. Probably the biggest library may not be the Library of Congress, but Google. Google is massive in terms of its library capabilities. We underestimate how big, and they own quite a lot of that content. All out-of-print things, they own it actually. So they basically collected on the ocean, the sand in the beach, put a name called Google, and it's theirs now. Think about that one. That's very clever about this game. So they are content aggregators, content creators. Publishing industries are getting buffeted by them. Have you seen now YouTube actually is going to offer Olympic live broadcast, bypassing the broadcast guys? Huge impact. All media companies are getting impacted by the same thing. So that's what it is. We have the devices, digital devices, especially the cell phone, the iPad, etc. Applications. Have you seen how many apps are there? My God, millions of apps on anything. Anything mundane, I have an app now, right? How do I brush my teeth? I have an app, right? It just goes on. It's very fascinating. That's what it is. And of course, the networks are getting, with the internet architecture, internet going on the networks itself is becoming very complicated stuff. So software is really dominating over the hardware. All of the telephone companies will tell you that. So this is what's happening. Advances in information technology have shifted from hardware to software and from wired. How many of you remember landline telephones? How many remember black telephone? Remember black telephone with a rotary dial? Yeah. Exactly. I try to show to my grandchildren and they think this is some strange alien futuristic product. It's very fascinating the way they think. To them there's nothing like cell phone. That's the only thing they know. It's very fascinating. But how fast that have moved, that's the world we live in today. So from wired, everything is becoming wireless, which is a massive change. So let's just quickly talk about its impact. Examples are, of course, smartphones, internet and World Wide Web, memory devices. In my analysis, we have put too much emphasis on processing chips, like the computer chips. Biggest change agent, my view, has been storage. On my flash drive, I can store my life forever today. Have you seen? 16 gigabytes is nothing on a flash drive. They're thinking about 1 terabyte of capacity on this little device. I mean, to me, it's marvel of the world, whoever designed, however they came out with. So we don't have floppy disks. How can you remember floppy disks? The debate about 5 1/4 versus 7 or whatever, remember all that? I still remember those floppy disks, but today we are way beyond, so that's what's happening. So apps, apps, apps. Wireless is very key, wireless broadband as it is called. Social media are going to take over in the education field. They have taken over our life, definitely, but in the education field is what we are watching, the impact of not just the internet, but the social media, et cetera, et cetera. So here is the change. So our education has been, as I mentioned, location-centric. I have a campus. You have to come to the campus. I have a brick-and-mortar store, just like retailers. So Walmart as a retailer, Macy's as a retailer is struggling because Amazon is able to do far more convenient job. In fact, I will personalize. I took, coming here from my home near Emory University, a Lyft, L-Y-F-T, like a Uber. The convenience of that one is so much I'm addicted now. I don't have a payment problem. I don't have to have a cash in my pocket. I don't have to argue with the taxi driver, etc. I can take the time to do whatever I can do with my mobile phone or converse with the driver or whatever I can do. It's interestingly, certainly that's the new world out there. So I think we have to think about how can we make education both location and not location, and time and not time, like 24/7, and that's a key challenge in our industry. So I'll just go on to the next area. Modernization of physical and human resources. Generally, all enterprises, including education enterprises, are usually way behind. The biggest bottleneck is its own internal information technology, ICT infrastructure. We are struggling at my campus in business school. We have a great modern building, but the hardware in every class is obsolete every 13, 14 months. And the deans don't have budget that as much you install in capital dollars is the same amount you'll be having in annual upgrade software and hardware going forward. We thought capital would be substitute for variable expenses essentially, like building. Once you install, maintenance would be a lot less. That's not the case. So it's a very big challenge. And as I said, modernization of human resources, which means how do we make sure that the faculty is ahead of the students, if not at par with students. They know more than I do. It's very fascinating. So I ask my students to help me out for my presentations. Dolores and I were chatting, and I still miss my blackboard. Remember blackboard? With chalk? When I went to flip chart, I thought I was in heaven. Like a flip chart. Now, it's a white board here, right, actually. Not now in that kind of a flip chart. I used transparencies forever. When the world went PowerPoint, I've just migrated to PowerPoint, and people are way beyond. They're saying PowerPoint is obsolete. How can you teach real-time using, wireless technologies? It's very interesting. All the textbooks, our forecast is, will shift from print to video. Video, which was peripheral. Remember supplemental. The publisher will give you a package to show in the classroom. If you have a case you are teaching, then case, logo and company, etc. Today, video will be your chapter, and the print would be peripheral, supplemental. That's the latest change taking place now. Everything is video now, very interesting, whereas we were all trained on the print material and how to do the print-related work by and large. I think that's a key change. Electronic online libraries, of course, we are all used to that. Internet-based interactive education. Distributed delivery. Delivery cannot be, it can be asynchronous, as it is called primarily. Rise of the online self-study programs. UNC Chapel Hill, I think 3 well-known universities are offering full MBA online, accredited. So they've broken that barrier that online could be or should not be accredited. Apparently it's working quite well, which is interesting change. We are watching that. And University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign has dropped the price for a, I think, 2-year MBA, $10,000. Now we have a price reduction at the same time, which is interesting to watch, okay? A rise of this explosion of MOOCs, obviously. Coursera, edX is another platform. Basically, will there be a surplus of faculty? It's a question people are raising. As they are raising with artificial intelligence, remember? We'll have the human capital, especially educated, professional, cognitively based, human capital. Do we need that many people? That's a very provocative question in many ways, and therefore, how do you handle that change, right? Pretty much. So that's another area. So I'm sorry I'm running late because of the time, but let me just go through that one. The third one is globalizing enterprises. Domestic orientation to global orientation is one dimension. More and more companies are have to think their competition is global, if not customers global, their suppliers are definitely global, etc. And from business conglomerates, which used to be the old model, where you have diversified businesses, analysts are now forcing companies to become core. Have you seen how much breakup of the companies is taking place right now? General Electric, which used to be most diversified before Jack Welch, he rationalized to 12 businesses. Jeff Immelt has rationalized even further, and all the core businesses are gone, and the only thing they're betting is on Internet of Things as a future. One business, essentially. Even GE Capital, I think they're letting go now. GE Appliances, of course, they sold it. Bulb business is gone, which is where they began. You see the transition of corporations in this regard. So focused businesses, which says universities will have to think about what are they good at. Traditional notion that I should have humanities and should be subsidized by business discipline, which is a typical model, right? Liberal arts deans and business deans always argue about, kind of a thing. I think those are the ones that universities have to have a tough standard to say, well, humanities can be offered, if they are going to be a professional school, online. Or reverse. We are a humanities university primarily, and therefore we will never allow business school to even exist. Sounds like Princeton University. John Hopkins did not have a business school till very recently. You see? So there are many, many universities who believe business education, even though it may be a lucrative business, from their core belief system, it doesn't belong here. So it's very possible one can do that thing. Or you go to India, where whole university is a management institute. There is no other discipline. So can you have a management university only as the university, where liberal arts, ethics, religion, economics are all sort of a supported, no tenure track. They're basically, what you call, extension, additional, supported faculty. It's something that you have to learn, but there's no, like business communication people, right? We don't have a tenure track position for those. It's very similar kind of an argument. This is the kind of a dialogue taking place. So, rise in international diversity in classroom because of this. We already have it at Emory, I know. Rise of corporate universities, very key phenomenon. All corporations are having large internal training, and they can offer MBA degree. Remember, MBA degree is not any proprietary degree by anybody. It's like Yellow Pages. I worked on Yellow Pages. Yellow Pages was generic brand. Nobody owned that. Nobody claimed even it. So as a corporate university, I may be one of the large companies, let's say AT&T University. Sprint actually had a great university of excellence in the 80s even. And they say, we will offer an in-house MBA by borrowing faculty from different places. I don't need the accreditation of SESB or anybody, for example. Very fast-growing industry. Or they start a separate university as a feed mechanism into their own workforce, for example. That's another possibility. So it's very interestingly, cross-cultural immersion is becoming more and more requirement now. You have to send students abroad, okay, pretty much. So that's one more area. Offer business education on a global basis. Some of the universities are expanding, especially in China. All the top business schools now have executive MBA programs anchored somewhere in China, Shanghai, Beijing, other cities by and large, as a actually good revenue maker. So let me just move on. I know I'm running way behind. This is the traditional Michael Porter forces of competition framework, right? So you have basically rivalry among existing institutions. This has become pretty intense. So for example, Wharton today, and probably very creative experiment, first year MBA curriculum is free because it's core. You go to Coursera and take those classes. All of a sudden, you don't have to have MBA recruiters all over the world, which is a very expensive proposition of sending them by travel, being in the hotels, etc. Reach is much greater. Internet has a fabulous reach, and it's a very rich medium. Now you have a lot more people enrolled, and you screen them out if they don't perform well in the first year. Then you admit them in the second year. When they come on the campus, 1 year expense only, first of all, living expenses, which are now quite significant, especially work experienced MBAs who actually have, like maybe married even, for example, et cetera, which is interesting. A brilliant experiment is going on. So suddenly you drop the cost of an MBA because all the top private universities give about 35% to 50% discount in any way through fellowships. So the net revenue is not list price. There's a whole discounting price. So they woke up and say, why do that thing? And now you get brighter and better students from all over the world. It's very fascinating to watch, which is interesting. So it's a virtuous cycle. We talked about the corporate universities as your customers becoming your competitor, our faculty as competitors. This is just about happening. Many faculty members in many disciplines, including business and economics, have become celebrities on the MOOC, Coursera. A colleague of mine who is a dean actually at a university, very good teacher, MIT PhD. He has been deaning 2 places now, excellent man. He offers a typical introductory economics course, and he probably has 10,000 students worldwide, quite a lot from Eastern European countries, like Poland, Hungary, etc. He's a celebrity in his own right. People know him, not the institution that he belongs to. Are you with me? This is just about to happen among the top celebrity professors who are very well known, especially in disciplines like finance, because they come on CNBC, kinds of business programs. They're world class. They might be Nobel Prize winners, or they're thinking about the stock market is legendary, or about the real estate market. So they are celebrities in their own right. That's what it is. And a hybrid degree program. So let me I'm so sorry about the time. I've gone way beyond I wanted to. So let me just go to the last price. So productivity improvements will become very key because of this. Which means what is the productivity of the faculty? We don't offer any elective course unless you have 15 students at least. At private universities, that's the norm. In our core classes, like at Harvard, 75 students per section. Norm used to be 60. It's creeping up, which means how many paying students are in the classroom, which means each class, how much revenue are we generating, literally, right? Which is what turns out to be. So faculty productivity is going to become a very key issue going forward. Consolidation of departments and disciplines. After the first energy crisis, I began to observe that many universities decided to either give up disciplines or consolidate them. Consolidate so that there'll be engineering and economics together. Or economics is in the humanities someplace, because administrative costs are now to a level where you need much larger scale. So we see that kind of a rationalization taking place. Inter-university consortia programs, in other words, how can we cooperate? We have an example right in Atlanta. Georgia Tech and Emory has a cooperative program in bioengineering. 5 years, it's number 1. Georgia Tech does not have a medical school. We don't have an engineering. Very good complementary relationship. And both institutions seem to be quite happy. How do you create that? Refocus on the core disciplines within the business school. What is it that you really would like to be identified with, kind of a notion? 1 or 2 1 or 2 sub-disciplines of business. Off-campus education is becoming very important now, more and more. and greater customer orientation. Now, I don't agree that students are customers. I don't buy that argument. Okay? Typical debate. I do, however, have the following view. If you take the analog from the physicians, then students are not expert at all. Patient has no knowledge, not just a vocabulary of all the medications and the symptoms, etc., but they don't know how to treat themselves. So how can you say, you tell us what I should teach you? It makes no sense. But bedside manners are very important, which means, are you capricious or not capricious? Are you grading properly or not? Are you giving the respect to the student? They are called bedside manners or hygiene factor in some fashion. That way, all physicians are trained. You have an absolute godlike power, don't exercise it. Have the empathy on the other side, empathy with the patient kind of a notion. That to model is, to me, is more likely probably what we will end up doing, That's interesting. So that's the part of customer orientation primarily. So here are the relative areas. First of all, curriculum will have to become more flexible, as is a given. Flexibility of how you navigate. And Stanford actually took a lead in their MBA program about creating pretty much a personalized MBA, rather than a mass MBA kind of a notion. Experiential learning will become very key component. More and more, we think it may be as much as 50% of the total class contact hour time. Like in engineering, you give the lectures, there's a lab section, remember? Monday, Wednesday, you give a lecture, Friday, there's a lab hour. Where students are into smaller groups doing something, concepts are actually implemented, kind of a notion. Online interactive pedagogy. I have created a framework many years ago from 3 hours of learning, which is how our education got organized, primary school, secondary school, and now higher education, same way, which is reading, writing, arithmetic. It is changing to 3 eyes of learning. Learning has to be interactive, so not just lectures and taking notes. Learning has to be integrated, which means what you teach in English and what you teach in chemistry, there is a common denomination. Go and figure out. That's the whole point. We don't connect finance and marketing. We don't even connect accounting and finance. Are you with me? Ours are very tight silos by subdisciplines. Interesting. How do you create that integration of knowledge? And a third one is that it has to be more individualized, which means in a class of 60, still student feels he's getting a one-on-one education, which technology, this is where more possible, this is the way we are. So this framework has become important in the book, which is influencing ASCSB essentially, right? Discipline-based MBA, which is the biggest change happening worldwide. You don't have MBAs for general management, leadership kind of a thing, but you have an MBA in marketing, MBA in sales management, MBA in supply chain, whatever, what I'm saying? So you get into a lot more electives, much deeper. So the general core, if it is a 1 year, 2 semester, you crunch it into 1 semester. Or do it online even, to release more time for getting very in-depth, skill-based MBA is the hottest area going right now. And that's again, ASCSB is watching this trend and see whether they would like to bless it more and more in terms of reaccreditation. Cross-cultural immersion is becoming a necessity. I don't think you have to go to some other country for cross-cultural immersion because it's expensive. My view is that if you were in Los Angeles area, there are 70 ethnic communities, each one of them behaving as if they live in their own home country, speak the language. You can have a cross-cultural immersion right then and there. At Columbia University in the 60s, I would take all white students, all male primarily, MBA classes. I would take them to Harlem, which is next door. They had never visited Harlem. If you want ethnic diversity experience, go to Harlem, spend half a day, you will understand the dynamics of consumption, procurement, buying, etc., and the language. You don't have to go to Africa to understand African culture, you see, or Caribbean islands. I mean, it's very interesting. We always think we are so multicultural that we can provide the experience within the country rather than outside the country. In fact, I'll make a provocative statement. I think we just need to get out of Atlanta to southern Georgia. Or we need to go to northern mountain communities, and you see ethnic diversity in this country. I don't mean ethnic in terms of race, but cultural diversity, you know. The white population in mountain areas are very different than metro cosmopolite people. So that's really what I'm talking about, okay. Custom degree programs will become more real. If you have a relationship with Chick-fil-A, for example, why not create an MBA program or undergraduate just for Chick-fil-A, blending the education. In fact, we often use executives as our teachers because they bring the internal knowledge and we bring in the outside knowledge, essentially. Blended learning, which is online versus, you know, offline kind of a thing. Multimedia, multi-expert teaching. This is becoming a problem for people like me. Students expect me to be absolutely comfortable with all media. And I'm learning them right now, okay? Which is interesting. So how all of us will have to become not only using the flip chart on the one hand, but also the online media, especially video-oriented, and how do you do that thing? I think there has to be some investment in educating. We are trying very hard to educate the faculty through workshops to say, do this thing, it's good for you, etc., on a volunteer basis. And quite a few faculty are learning, and they're teaching others to say, I experienced blended learning, I experienced using multiple technologies, and I can tell you here are the benefits or not benefits. A better bedside manners we already talked about. And the last one is very key, especially for teaching-oriented institutions. We have to get funded research more and more. In the business school, it's the only school I know where the faculty is used to getting research support from dean's budget, rather than faculty generating research funding on their own. Humanities does it. They apply for grants. We cannot go for a tenure decision at Emory in medical school without getting NIH grant first. You're not even eligible for tenure because NIH grant is so critical to create new knowledge. It is basically by a panel of judges, which is stronger review than a publication. Publication in top journal is automatically guaranteed, is what I understand. So our health sciences, nursing now, surprisingly, which is very clinical, public health and the medical school are under that kind of a tenure process. And we are now questioning whether we should have similar one in business schools. Europeans are going through that cycle. England collapsed economically, as you know, got the conservative government, Cameron government, and they made a strong stand that a faculty in business has to get grants from the European Union, is a part of the European Union. Now Brexit has changed the model, but there was a lot of money out there, but faculty was never asked to even think about that one, apply for grants, etc., which is becoming more and more now a necessity, pretty much. So that's the last area. So I'll just stop here because I've to spend more time than I thought I would be. Is it okay if we extend by 5-10 minutes? Okay. So I will stop here, and I hope you have enjoyed. I forgot to ask earlier, do you detect this southern accent I have? I think I speak like you do, till I listen to my audio or video tape and I find this strange Indian sound, you know. It's very interesting. So I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I have time.
Hi, so I'm Keith Miller. I'm assistant professor, management and supply chain. Two questions. One is a point. It ties back to your comment on the telecom industry.
Yes.
And does anybody remember landlines? Yesterday, I had AT&T out to my house because I put a new roof on, and the roofers drove over a pedestal box, which is a multi-unit, multi-house junction box. Well, 5 years ago, I asked them to move that away from my driveway, and AT&T said, we'll do it for $4,000. Yesterday, when the guy came out to repair the pedestal, I said, can you move it? And he goes, why don't I just get rid of it?
Yeah.
He chopped it off and buried it. And I said, that was going to cost me $4,000 just 5 years ago. He goes, it's obsolete.
Yes.
We're putting fiber optics in. We don't even use these anymore. No one in your neighborhood has a telephone line not tied to cable or wireless. Shocking. So that was just a comment. But the question I have is, why is it taking MBA or the business world so long to go to functional or discipline-based MBAs? You go to Master of Science, you get a Master of Science in any of the disciplines. Why can't you get an MBA in marketing or supply chain or whatever?
The degree became, MBA degree became more an intangible asset for the graduate, was marketable degree. You had sort of leadership career paths, this is how it began. MS degrees plateaued in the process. And the universities began to de-emphasize, in the business schools, the MS degree programs. It's coming back in a different reincarnation, where it's the MS curriculum, essentially, but you offer an MBA degree. The only place where MS degrees are doing well under the recent change is probably in finance. Several universities are able to, because the typical undergraduate economics major who goes as an analyst is making so much of money, he does not have the time for 2 years to take time out. He or she wants to stay in the same industry, which is the investment banking, the stock analyst, people, etc., where he says, I need a better education than what I got 5, 10 years ago. So they are coming back to get that degree, essentially, MS. And MS degrees are becoming hybrid between online and offline. But other than that, we have not seen the Europeans have gone ahead by having a separate MBA just on branding, or on product management in my disciplines. It's that, so we give very in-depth knowledge. So the person graduating, you see, young MBAs don't start as vice presidents. They have to be in a silo. Whether it's a marketing silo, they start, like a sales organization or a brand management, And the managers are saying, look, they're all smart, bright people. We understand that thing, but they're not employable. We have to invest 6 months, 8 months, 9 months just for them to get understanding, what the functional area is all about. So I think that's coming back in a way, interestingly. Yes, please.
So you said something that I think we've all...
Hold on. Yeah.
Oh. You said something I think we've all thought about, is that our students many times know more than we do about a particular topic, or certainly about technology and how to use it. And I wondered if there's a model out there. I think of crowdsourcing. You mentioned, how can we capitalize on the students' knowledge, maybe in a sharing capacity? Offer them a degree if they are willing to. I don't know, if willing to do something.
No, I think it's a great thought. It's a great idea.
Is there a model out there that you know of?
I think somebody will create a model.
Okay, let's do
The idea
that.
is so practical, is the point I'm trying to make. And I think it can be done. It may be done by somebody as a third party,
Right.
and then offer it to all schools of business, like a shared service.
Yeah.
That's more likely. In fact, I just flew back from India. I had gone for a board meeting, and I found fascinating a for-profit corporation has now become a case-writing company. They also have a case-writing company. They're publishing house. Media publishing, not the textbook publishers. And they're saying it's a great money because we can create those cases. We can have people's cases deposited, with their own acceptance formula. So it's basically becoming crowdsourcing, essentially, So I think cases will go crowdsourcing clearly. I see the handwriting on the wall. Whether those are Darden's cases, or Ivy School in Canada, for example. Harvard has its own cases, but there's a whole alternative to Harvard now, ICCH, the European Consortium. So case method of where people, and case is still very important pedagogy to teach. So we think that's where crowdsourcing will come very quickly. I am a little more, I would say, further to the right about this thinking, extreme on my view is that I think, who says students cannot be professors? What's wrong with that? And the students actually can learn better because the best way to learn is to teach. I find that every time I teach something, repeat, iterate, I learn more and more and more. And so my view is that the best way to make them understand the concept is to make them teach. So is there any way one can do that kind of a crowdsourcing, if possible, within the campus? There are so many, but the idea is so practical that some entrepreneur will do it. There will be an app, okay? I'm sure. And these guys crank up apps so fast nowadays. It's very fascinating. So young people. So I'm mentoring several startup entrepreneurs as a sort of a side contribution. And I find that absolutely incredible. They're obsessed. They want to do it while they're studying, like team of 2-3 people, and they have an app for anything in life. So I think it's very possible. In fact, this may be financially very viable, actually, the way I think about it. Because universities often have captive resources which they can't afford anymore. So, right, okay. One more question. I'm so sorry. It was supposed to be half an hour, but I missed the mark completely. Yeah. Yes, please.
One of the future practices I saw on your slide dealt with the corporate universities.
Yes.
Have you seen any collaborations between universities and corporations for them to have their internal
Yes.
universities, either online or physical?
There are several. In this country, one of the first ones was, I think it was either Baruch School of Business in New York, New York City, University of New York, or one more, I forget the name. They had a complete dedicated program for AT&T in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, using corporate facilities because their own learning center. Faculty went out and taught. That's the simplest model. I teach on your campus, rather than, and then students are all there, they're managers, they don't have to travel to come to the campus, right away. And that whole program, and degree was offered by that university degree, okay? I think AT&T experimented with 2-3 universities, where curriculum was not changed. The AT&T managers would not be teaching unless they were like guest speakers, kind of stuff, right? Then you had a second model, University of Texas, a colleague of mine designed for Texas Instruments, UT Austin. So he created a whole degree program, which, by the way, is always a debate in the faculty because faculty says if all the managers are coming from one company, one industry, we don't have the diversity of knowledge. And they're not comfortable with that because they have to learn about that industry language. Every industry has its own language. Faculty is used to teaching their own cases across industries that they have learned very well. So retooling the faculty becomes a lot more difficult in the process. And the company says, look, it's a custom program. That means you got to know who we are. You got to know our language. Each industry or a company has its own language, and that's the key. But that's you blend that. And then the third extreme is, the third one is where you invite their managers, senior executives, as your faculty. They teach a class. Especially in technology, that's very common because all of them have PhDs. R&D lab directors can be at Bell Labs or at Princeton University. It doesn't matter. They're just world-class. So there it's much more common in science and technology. In business, it is just experimented. The last most extreme is that you design your own MBA as a corporation and you pick and choose faculty. Where top universities are not allowing professors to work like that. They're saying you are our employees. You cannot be a contractor on the side. Without the degree, the best campus was Duke Corporate Education. It crossed more than $100 million of revenue, just custom programs. They would have a program for IBM, $10 million contract. Their expertise is in design of the curriculum. There's a whole staff of people. And in fact, they were so good but non-traditional, so they spun them out as a standalone corporation, but owned by the business school. And they, of course, had the flexibility of hiring faculty from any other campus, which usually is a bone of contention, the debates go on. So that's the most extreme. I've seen a company in Singapore creating an MBA just for a company, and they are the contractors, essentially, and they implement, and that I've seen in India. Crompton Greaves was the multinational in Transformer, etc. And I saw a whole 11-month MBA just for Crompton Greaves, but designed by an outside expert, right? A non-university expert. We did that thing in the telephone industry, for example. I did that myself in the telephone industry. I think we offered a MS degree rather than MBA at University of Southern California through the Annenberg School of Communication because jurisdiction belonged there. A typical MBA for all the baby bells managers. Sloan Fellows was what they were getting out. They wanted something else, where you came on the campus. So we had all new cases, all related to telecom industry. So that's a massive change that you have to make. But it's a long-term contract. In fact, Kansas State University here has had, if not still has it, a similar program for AT&T. Began with Bell South, and then when Bell South was merged or bought out by AT&T, it continued as an AT&T program. So it's a huge potential. I think we have to, and I think places like Clayton State will have more flexibility and freedom to do it. It's very interesting. I think you guys have a lot more capability, first of all, and flexibility. So I would target that. I think it's personally, I enjoy that also in terms of design myself. So there are so many possibilities. Okay. Anybody else? Any last question, comment?